And welcome into a 7th grade edition of the Hauger History Podcast. Mr. Hauger here, Tuesday, November 3rd, 2016, just a week away from the 2016 general election. And today we're talking about a 7th grade topic in review, getting ready for a chapter test and quiz about the Mongol Empire and the impact on China. Today's inquiry questions are: what was the impact of the Mongols on the political structure of China? What was the impact of the Mongols on the economic systems of China? And what was the impact of the Mongols on the intellectual and artistic culture of China? All this and nothing else on today's edition of the Hauger History Podcast, brought to you by Podbean.com. Let's lead off with a brief conversation between you and me, and mostly me, because you're not here, although you are somewhere, about the impact of stereotypes of the Western view and the barbarian stereotype that most Westerners accept when we look back at the 13th century Mongols. And we always stress in my class that you can't judge the past by the present-day moniker and present-day mindset, but we do our best. We look at the Mongols as barbaric people who are plunderers, who are intent merely to maim, slaughter, destroy, and seize nearly all of Asia. And this perception is based on our Western tradition, or based on Persian, Chinese, Russian, and other accounts of the speed and ruthlessness that the Mongols really did carve through and got one of the largest empires in the world and held it for about 70 years. And this has shaped Asian and Western images of the Mongols and their earliest leader, Genghis Khan. Such a view has diverted attention from the considerable contributions and wonderful effects that the Mongols had to 13th and 14th century civilization as a whole. Although it was through the brutality of military campaigns that you can't downplay or ignore all the treacherous things that happened, we have to consider the impact that expanding trade, opening China up to the world, and building highways and canal systems had on the everyday people as well. So we're going to look at it in a little bit different way today when we study and consider the impact. Let's consider the year 1271. The Mongols rolled in, conquered China, and moved the capital to Beijing. I bet you didn't know that. Massive walls were built around the city. The streets were made broader and wider. This made trade a lot more economically feasible and probable. They also created artificial lakes and islands in a closed complex that we know as the Forbidden City. In class, we were talking a lot about the differences between the Tang and Song Empire, and in Southern Song period, China was relatively disunified. It was segmented, and the Mongols actually managed to reunify China. It was through blood and chaos, but in a way, it brought experts from the Middle East, Central Asia, and more places to administer China. And it brought a lot of ideas together that weren't in availability when the country was more closed off to foreign influence. There was also the introduction of a census for tax collection purposes, which also left behind lots of evidence and statistical figures and facts to give us more of an impression of how the history was affected by the empire. They also redistricted provinces based on the offspring and managers that Genghis Khan produced, and relegated to different responsibilities in different regions, which stretched through almost the entirety of Asia and reached into the Middle East and Europe. They put control of governors, and that increased central control and the ability that they had to enforce their policies throughout a large area. Let's talk about the economy. Dollar bills, y'all. The impact: tax farming. What was that? Well, they managed to govern themselves because they could bring in taxes to the center and control the empire and how it would function. That also brought in foreigners. They collected foreigners from them as well. Some cities began to really prosper because foreigners were paying trade, bringing in items from all around the world and trading along for and to China so that they could gain new goods and gain a new market for the goods that they were producing, including, most notably, silk. They reunified China and revitalized the north-south trade along the Grand Canal and extended the reach of canals to support trade as well as the flow of water. And they revived the ports in southern China for grain trade. Wheat, what did he say? Oh, see, that was a pun. I will repeat it, though. Ports in South China revived their ports due to grain trade. Wait, get it? The economic impact continuing along. Businesses managed by corporations represented investors. You begin to have a more complex set of economic principles to back business. And there was also some issues about trusting paper money, but they began to issue it anyway, even though trust in it began to dissipate. Copper coins came back when trade with Japan terminated, and this helped the economy as well as people moved more into cities and became more urban and cosmopolitan. Cottage industries began to spring up too. It wasn't all big cities and urbanization. Infrastructure began to develop with water wheels, dams, and irrigation systems, providing people with the resources they needed to make more resources. That was a big sentence. Many farmers suffered under the Mongols. Evictions, brutal tax farming, there wasn't all kind. There were changes. Farmers began to be forced into servitude, which we don't really honor as much today, and dams and dikes began to break, which flood the Yellow River area severely. So it wasn't all positive, but there were a lot of steps in the right direction, considering where they started, the whole conquering and killing thing. So there were a lot of impacts that were made. Now let's talk about intellectual. Let's get in the mind for a moment. Inside the mind, inside Inception, watching a movie inside your dream. Muslim scholars led calendar making and astronomy. Social status depended on ancestry, which resulted in the end of the civil service exam system because they would not let the Chinese who they conquered become officials in the system anymore. From ranking from highest to lowest, you had Mongols, then Central Asians, then Northern Chinese, then Southern Chinese. So there was segmentation, and it was a bit of an inversion of the old model of social stratification. So it also did something else, though, besides some of the negative things. It brought Confucianism back, and it was different than the social ranking system because merchants were given more status, and Confucianism brought more intellectual impact to the area. It brought new literature as well, different approaches to managing time, principles, obeying laws, and it kept leaders in touch with new technology and ideas. Scholars and texts were also exported from China to the Middle East, and they set up observatories across Central Asia. Algebra and trigonometry began to enter the country as well. So new ideas in medicine began to flow in and out, and this makes a big social impact. Families went into business. In the countryside, the plague was spreading and migrations were happening. So there's a lot of good and a lot of bad happening simultaneously through social, intellectual, economic, and other implications. Contributions from the Mongols, though, should not be looked at as simply barbarianism. As you can see, there were many new innovative ideas that were constructed, new temples, monasteries, a network of roads and postal stations, and merchants began to bring in so many new ideas and culturally diffuse themselves all around China. Wow. So did you learn something? I hope you did. It's kind of my job, but it's also a podcast, so it's kind of fun. Anyways, Mr. Hauger here, hoping you wrote down some good notes about the Mongol Empire, and we'll catch you next time. Wherever you're doing, whatever you're doing, we're out of the dog days of Octi Doggy now into November. Enjoy it, enjoy the holidays, and we'll see you on the next edition for 7th grade of the Hauger History Podcast.